This next podcast is going to go into the internal environment. The title here is Control of Body Temperature and Water Balance, and those are some of the major things that we have to balance within our bodies to maintain a state that is stable. And this stable state or um, stable internal environment is what biologists refer to as homeostasis. So that word homeostasis means maintaining this steady internal conditions. There's a lot of things that inside of us we have to maintain, and all animals have to maintain at a regular rate or balance, and water. Waste products that are produced through metabolism, temperature, even things like how our heart beats. It has to beat at on a regular rhythm. The division of our cells when we're growing, the production of new cells. All these things are maintained at certain states or are regulated at certain speeds. And that's what homeostasis is maintaining this internal state. So we're going to look at some of these and how they are regulated. Now, we mentioned in our outline here that there's some mechanisms that keep these in place and systems that keep these in place. So these are called feedback mechanisms. Um, let's see. As we mentioned here, thermoregulation is the term for that temperature that we mentioned. Osmoregulation is a term for that water balance. And then excretion is a term for the disposal of compounds that are nitrogen-based compounds that can be toxic if we don't get them out of our bodies. So we have excretory systems or animals have means of getting rid of this nitrogen. Um, all right, let's see. Okay, so we're going to start with looking at thermoregulation. So thermoregulation is the process where an animal maintains an internal temperature within a certain range. So we have two groups of animals. Animals can be categorized into two groups based on how they regulate this temperature. We have some that are called ectothermic, and these would be animals that their body temperature changes more with their outside environment. So they don't internally regulate as much as the other group. The other group are called endothermic. Endothermic are those that generate the majority of their heat from within their body. So they have physiological means. So that's one way of describing it. Ectotherms use physical means or use some physical means of maintaining. That would be something like behavior, moving to certain areas, basking out in the sun. So all these are different physical means of helping to either warm themselves up or cool themselves down. Um, and so the ectotherms are called cold-blooded because their blood can get very cold if it's outside very cold. Endothermic animals are referred to as warm-blooded. Their blood is maintained at a certain body temperature, and so they have regulatory mechanisms to keep this in place. Now they can fluctuate a little bit with that internal temperature, but not as much. So the ectotherms have to adjust their behavior and physical means in order to adjust their internal temperature. So a common example would be heat gain or loss through convection or radiation, conduction or evaporation. So a lot of times you'll see ectotherms will be adjusting in these ways. Okay, let's see. So migration, we talked about that. Okay, so the next thing we talk about is osmoregulation. Osmoregulation is maintaining a water balance. So we have to gain and lose water. All animals do have to gain and lose water, and so we have a system to get rid of this. And included in this system is going to be metabolic waste. So we have an excretory system. So our excretory system is going to filter out of the blood this nitrogenous waste, and then it will be filtered out of the blood into a series of tubes where it'll be excreted from the body. If we did not do this, that nitrogenous waste would build up in our body and become toxic. So some invertebrates have different ways to get rid of that nitrogenous waste. Some invertebrates can just diffuse it across their walls, their outer integument, or they can diffuse it, or they have contractile vacuoles that'll move it out of the cell. And then we have some invertebrates that have excretory systems for collecting this nitrogenous waste. Now, let's see. So water balance is closely tied with this. We also can regulate water in these ways. So water is osmoregulation, and then the excretory system can regulate that water, but also that nitrogenous waste. Now, in water balance, we can look at aquatic animals and see how they regulate, because they live in water, but they still have to get rid of that nitrogenous waste, and they still have to regulate water within their bodies. So what's interesting is in the difference between freshwater animals and saltwater aquatic animals. So here we see a freshwater fish, and it basically gains a lot of water through osmotic regulation, through the gills and body surface. It gets a lot of water, comes into the fish. Osmosis is the movement of water from an area of lower concentration to an area of higher concentration. And so what's happening here is we have a lot of water. These arrows are showing the movement that's taking place. So here we have a large arrow. That's implying that there's a large amount of water that's moving from outside the fish to inside the fish through the gills and body surface. And then we have a small amount that's taken up through the mouth, small amount taken in through the gills. This would be ions that come in and from outside. So we have a high concentration inside the fish, higher concentration of solutes and ions and things like that inside the fish. So because of that, there tends to be more water movement through osmosis. All right, so it will drink a little bit of water, but most will come in through osmosis. And then it has to excrete all of that out, large amounts of water, but it'll also have in that nitrogenous waste that it has to get out. Now, I'm going to flip to the next slide, which shows saltwater fish, and you can look at the arrows, and the arrows are kind of different here. So pay attention to the arrows right here. And here's our saltwater fish. So this is a marine fish, and you can notice right off the bat here, we have different movement of these arrows right here. So these arrows were pulling in, and now they're going out. So here we have osmosis taking place, but osmosis is moving in the opposite direction. We have water that's leaving the fish and moving to the water outside the fish, and that's because there's a higher concentration in that salt water than inside the fish. So we have movement of water out and salt and ions out rather than in. So because of that, the fish is going to be losing a lot of water that way. It's got to take a lot of water in through its mouth, through drinking it. So it drinks a lot of that salt water, and it will have excretion of these ions in small amounts of water in its urine. So that's osmosis or osmotic regulation in fresh and saltwater fish. So again, in that urine through the excretory system, we get rid of that nitrogen buildup. These are some of the nitrogen compounds that different types of animals build up. We have ammonia in fish, urea in mammals, amphibians, and some other bony fish, birds, and a lot of reptiles and insects build up uric acid, but the common denominator here is nitrogen. So all of these have that nitrogen compound that can be toxic if you don't get it out of the body. So these build up through metabolism breakdown in the body, and they travel into the bloodstream, and then we have to get those out of the body. All animals do. So the main structure for getting those out, the organ that we have for filtering those out, are our kidneys. So we're going to look at the human kidney for our example, but the kidney is basically we have two kidneys. We see our kidney here. It's made up of these functional units called nephrons. So basically the nephron is made up of a series of the bloodstream, of course, goes through the nephron. It runs through the kidneys, and we have veins and arteries that run through each nephron. So the nephrons have these vessels that run off of the veins and arteries that group into a tuft of blood vessels. So these blood vessels kind of form a tuft or a ball, and right there is where most of the filtration takes place. That ball is called the glomerulus, that ball of capillaries. Remember, we talked about capillaries being thin-walled and stuff can go through? This is where that nitrogenous waste goes through. So here's the glomerulus here, and it's surrounded by the end of the tube. So it kind of goes around this ball of blood vessels, and that's where the tube system starts. So the filtrate takes place there. The filtration, and it goes out and it follows a path through this series of tubes that is in the nephron. So this shows our series of tubes. First thing attached to the tuft of blood vessels is called the Bowman's capsule. That's what surrounds it. And then we have a tube that connects to that called the proximal tube. It's also kind of twisted around and kind of curved around, so it's sometimes referred to as a convoluted tube, proximal convoluted tube. Then it goes down this path down here and back up. That path down and up right here is called the loop of Henle. And so we go down and up, and then we go to another little area of tubing here called the distal tube. The distal tube hooks right into the collecting duct, which takes it out of the nephron, and from there we leave the nephron. We are in the kidney at that point, and then the material remaining in that tube at that point is primarily our filtrate, which is urea and water. It flows onto the ureter from the collecting duct and then to the urinary bladder where it leaves the body. So that's kind of the path of the filtrate in the urine as it builds up and collects that nitrogenous waste as it is leaving the body. So here's this is a comparison of those different types of animals and how they get rid of that the water, how they manage that water in the body. And that's where we end our lecture on homeostasis, water balance, and all the different temperature balance and what we balance. Oh, one last thing is these systems where we have feedback are part of homeostasis, and we have negative feedbacks and positive feedbacks. Negative feedback is when there's a reduction of a product that stimulates that system. Positive feedback when the production of a system increases that. So that's like blood sugar is a good example of negative feedback. If our blood sugars decrease, the pancreas releases a hormone that increases our blood sugar. So those are all things that, again, we have to balance in our body to keep this homeostatic state. And we'll end there, pick up in our next podcast.